When you look at a globe, it is easy to assume the North Pole is a frozen continent similar to Antarctica. But there is absolutely zero landmass under the North Pole. It is entirely an ocean. What looks like solid ground is actually a thin, floating sheet of ice. Because it sits on top of moving currents, that ice is constantly drifting, grinding against itself and tearing apart without warning. When massive ice sheets collide, they crush together to form pressure ridges up to 20 meters high. When they rip apart, they create deep fractures known as leads, exposing the black, freezing ocean below. If you fall into that water, your body shuts down in about 90 seconds. Above the ice, the environment is just as hostile. The air temperature regularly drops to -50 degrees Celsius, and for 6 months of the year, the sun never rises above the horizon. At the South Pole, engineers can drill stable foundations directly into bedrock. The North Pole actively destroys anything built on it, making a traditional, permanent base physically impossible to construct. In 1897, a Swedish explorer named Salomon André attempted to bypass this terrain entirely. He and 2 crewmates took off in a massive hydrogen balloon, intending to fly directly over the North Pole. Within hours, the Arctic weather forced them down. Freezing winds battered the balloon, and massive amounts of ice accumulated on the ropes, weighing the craft down until it crashed directly onto the drifting sea ice. It took 33 years for another crew to find their remains. Because of the extreme cold, their bodies were perfectly preserved, and their camera film was still intact. The developed photos and recovered diaries detailed exactly how they spent their final months. Stranded hundreds of kilometers from solid ground, they dragged their heavy supplies across the shifting ice, meticulously recording their own deterioration from starvation and the extreme cold. The André expedition proved the North Pole was a heavily restricted zone. The environment was engineered to reject human survival. Since building a concrete foundation on a moving ocean is impossible, engineers developed a highly dangerous workaround, living directly on the drifting ice sheets. In 1937, the Soviet Union launched the North Pole 1 mission. A team of 4 men lived inside a reinforced canvas tent pitched directly on the frozen ocean. For 274 days, they slept on ice that constantly drifted, meaning they never knew exactly where they would wake up the next morning. This high-risk strategy is still used today. At the temporary Russian Camp Barneo, teams arrive every spring and manually carve aircraft runways out of the ice in -40-degree weather. The ground beneath these camps is completely unpredictable. In 2022, the ice beneath Barneo suddenly fractured, forcing an emergency evacuation of everyone stationed there. Drifting stations highlight an extreme level of human ingenuity, but their sheer volatility forced governments to seek out stable, permanent solutions on solid ground. The solution was the land anchor strategy. Nations abandoned the exact geographic North Pole and built permanent outposts on the closest sovereign landmasses, like Canada's Station Alert and Norway's Ny-Ålesund. Keeping crews alive in these remote outposts requires immense logistical planning. Survival depends entirely on specialized heavy-lift planes landing on icy runways to drop off supplies before the long winter completely freezes the ocean and grounds all flights, stranding the crews for months. Even getting drinking water is a massive undertaking. To hydrate the crew, you have to gather ice, melt it, and filter it. Generating that necessary heat requires burning through thousands of liters of imported diesel fuel every single year. Because power is tied directly to survival, these bases operate on the rule of duplicates. If a single primary generator fails, temperatures inside the base will plummet to lethal levels in hours. Every heater, radio, and power source must have an exact functioning backup. The environment itself isn't the only threat. 600-kilogram polar bears actively hunt in these areas. Stepping outside the base requires donning heavy thermal layers and carrying a rifle, turning a simple errand into a high-stress 20-minute tactical mission. Maintaining these outposts is an exhausting, multi-million-dollar fight against thermodynamics and biology. So why do governments spend so much capital to stay here? The modern motivation is no longer historical curiosity or pure scientific research. Superpowers are absorbing these massive costs to secure claims to the ocean floor. The Arctic is warming twice as fast as the rest of the planet. Year over year, shrinking ice exposes the dark ocean beneath, unblocking access to massive, previously unreachable seabed deposits of oil, natural gas, and rare earth minerals. The race to claim these resources is aggressive. In 2007, a Russian expedition deployed a deep-sea submersible to dive over 4,000 meters below the ice and plant a rust-proof titanium flag directly into the seabed at the North Pole. To secure their future claims, global superpowers are expanding their military footprints across the Arctic. They are deploying specialized nuclear-powered icebreaker ships and reinforcing those permanent bases with troops. The deadliest environment on Earth has transitioned from a graveyard for early explorers into humanity's next geopolitical battleground, where the nations that master the ice will control the resources beneath.